Up next, a beautiful young woman is found dead under a bridge.
Did she jump from that bridge, or did somebody push her?
And police learn she had a secret life.
She was dancing under the name Roxanne, and they were calling her Foxy Roxy.
Police find a surveillance image of a truck near the bridge on the night she disappeared.
You can see an apparent body in the back of the pickup truck.
But who is driving the truck, and what is the motive?
There was something more going on than just a woman leaping from a bridge for no apparent reason.
It was early on a Saturday morning, underneath a bridge in Burlington Township, New Jersey, when an ATV rider found the body of a young woman. He assumed she'd taken her own life.
We just see a young girl. She looks like she's about 20 to 30 years old, about 100 pounds. She had no ID on her.
The damage to her body was consistent with a drop of about 12 to 14 stories.
Insect activity indicated she'd been dead several days. But who was this woman? Police released a description to the media.
Her manager from work called in, an ex-boyfriend called in saying that they recognized the description of the jewelry that she was wearing.
From the victim's butterfly pendant, she was identified as 21-year-old Rachel Ciani.
I kept telling myself that it wasn't true. And I told myself that all the way up until her funeral. Until I actually went up and looked at her.
Nancy knew something about her cousin Rachel Ciani that few other people knew. Rachel was a college student by day and an exotic dancer by night.
She was only doing it just to pay her way through college. And the way she described it to me was that she was dancing in an extremely skimpy bikini.
Rachel worked at a place called Divas International Gentlemen's Club across the bridge in Pennsylvania, just 3 miles from where her body was found. Her stage name was Roxanne.
Divas is your typical gentleman's club where guys go in, mostly guys, and, sit down and have some drinks and watch the girls.
Rachel's friends and relatives could not believe she committed suicide. They said she exhibited none of the typical signs of depression. Instead, she was focused on a career.
She was studying psychology because she said she really wanted to focus on that and help people.
And Rachel had a good relationship with her family, despite some disagreements about her employment.
Her father absolutely did not approve of it. They obviously loved her very much as a daughter. But I think that they had resolved themselves that Rachel had to find her own way through life and figure out what was going to be best for Rachel.
But was this a suicide? Evidence on the bridge revealed a disturbing clue.
There were some fibers that were consistent with the sweater that she had on, but there was also some blood stains on the outside wall of the bridge.
If the blood on the bridge was Rachel's, then this might have been murder. In a small town on the outskirts of Philadelphia, a young exotic dancer found dead beneath a bridge was front-page news.
I mean, if she worked at an ice cream stand, it wouldn't have said, ice cream girl, murdered. It was unsettling because everything was exotic dancer murdered or stripper thrown off bridge. It was never her name or that she was a Bucks County Community College student.
Since Rachel was found at the bottom of the bridge without shoes, wearing clean socks, investigators suspected she had been carried to the bridge and thrown over the side.
They were very clean. Up on top of the bridge, there were no shoes, there was no car, there was a lot of road debris and other dirt that would have become embedded in her socks if she was walking around up there.
Fibers from her sweater, wedged in the concrete of the bridge, also made it clear she didn't jump. Her body scraped along the side of the bridge. DNA testing on blood found near those fibers confirmed it was Rachel's blood, and that she was bleeding before she hit the ground.
So the police had to work backwards. They had to find out, how did that blood and how did that fiber get on the Pennsylvania Turnpike bridge rail?
There were no marks on Rachel's neck, so investigators didn't believe a ligature or even the killer's hands were used to strangle her.
If it's a large surface like a forearm pressing against the neck, or a large, just flat of the hand pressing against the neck, you don't get bruising.
Significant internal bleeding told medical examiners Rachel was still alive when she was thrown from the bridge.
The victim had blood spatters on the side of her face, and it wasn't consistent with a fall from the bridge.
2 broken fingernails made it clear she tried to defend herself. The cause of death was blunt force trauma, a skull fracture.
The fracture extends from one ear canal to the other ear canal.
Rachel's car, a battered old Lincoln, was in the parking lot of Divas, the gentleman's club where she worked.
There was food and money strewn about in the car, which led us to believe that her demise was not a result of a robbery.
Fellow dancers told police that a former cook, 26-year-old Jason Woods, had been bothering her.
He seemed to have somewhat of a fixation or obsession towards Rachel.
Where he actually told people that Rachel was his girlfriend. Wasn't true, but he told people that.
In fact, Jason had been fired just a month earlier, and when police found out why, they knew they had a solid suspect.
He was infatuated with her, and he was subsequently terminated because of his infatuation with Rachel Ciani.
When questioned by police, Jason denied any involvement in Rachel's murder.
He was believable, but we still couldn't rule him out. We always have to keep that individual in mind. He can be a good actor.
Then homicide investigators got a break. On the last night Rachel worked at Divas, she was in the parking lot talking with a friend after the club closed. And the man, obviously drunk, started banging on the door of the club. A local police officer witnessed the incident.
Call inside Divas. There's a guy banging on the door here. He's knocking. Ask him if they had a problem with him or something.
The policeman offered to help.
One of the owners or managers came out, said that it was okay. They knew Jack. He was a regular customer.
Jack was John Denofa, a 35-year-old businessman who had been in the club earlier that night. According to Divas' manager, Rachel offered to walk Denofa to the motel located right next door to the club.
Maybe she thought he had had too much to drink and she wanted to take care of him, help him perhaps get to his room.
Her friend had actually asked Rachel if she was okay, and Rachel indicated to her, "No, it's just Jack. I'm fine. I'm okay."
Motel records indicate Denofa checked into room 223. The hotel clerk remembered that Rachel helped Denofa up to his room, but he didn't recall seeing her leave. Denofa contradicted that. He claimed Rachel left and that he went up to his room alone.
He said that he was with her, and she just went her way and he went his way, and that was it. He said he had absolutely nothing to do with her demise whatsoever.
But to investigators, something just didn't seem right.
I didn't like the guy.
The prime suspect in Rachel Ciani's murder was the last known person to see her alive, Jack Denofa. He was married with no children and owned a sign company. Employees say, like clockwork, Denofa visited Divas every Tuesday night. Rachel was his favorite dancer.
She had mentioned Jack, and she said that, she wouldn't even have to work that night if she didn't want to because he would just give her money to sit there and talk to him. And she said that, he seemed like a lonely guy and that he was basically paying for her friendship.
We never discovered any evidence of any kind of sexual relationships. We asked the girls that, and we have no evidence at all that Rachel ever engaged in any kind of activity like that with him or anyone else for that matter.
Jack had a previous drunk driving arrest, so it wasn't unusual for him to stay at the motel connected to the dance club.
He would rent a motel room himself, and if he was too drunk to drive, sometimes Divas management would comp him a room. The weird thing about that was his wife was cool with it, and she would actually drive him to Divas and drop him off.
Jack Denofa had no criminal past and was well-liked.
If you could pick your neighbors, you'd pick Jack Denofa because there wasn't anything he wouldn't do for you. Came from a good family, was a workaholic, ace pool player, backslapping guy, chairman of his high school alumni association. Great guy.
On the night of Rachel's murder, witnesses saw Rachel accompany an inebriated Denofa to the motel next door to the club. Jack Denofa didn't deny that. He simply said she left without going to his room.
We knew Jack Denofa was in there, but we wanted to find out. We wanted to place Rachel in that room.
4 days had passed since Denofa stayed in the motel room, and it had been cleaned repeatedly. But analysts got a break. On the outside windowsill, they found white fibers, and there was a tiny spot of blood in the shower stall. Andrew Nardelli compared those fibers to fibers from Rachel's sweater.
One of the main types of characteristics that we would look for, first off, would be color. And a number of the fibers from the window were a different color than the types of fibers that were from the sweater.
Though superficially similar, the fibers did not match. Investigators now compared the blood sample from the shower stall to Rachel's DNA and got another setback.
With the swab from the shower stall, there was no DNA detected. I ran the sample twice. I tried to concentrate the sample. However, it was a small, very weak blood swab, so no DNA was detected from that swab.
On Denofa's hotel registration, he said he was driving a 1996 red Dodge pickup truck that was parked in the hotel parking lot. If he did cross the bridge that night, surveillance cameras would show it.
They show clearly a 1996 red Dodge Ram pickup truck with a motionless body in the open bed with clothes similar to Rachel Ciani's going through the toll booth at 13 minutes after 3 on March 29th.
25 minutes later, the truck returned with nothing in the back.
What the tapes don't show, clearly anyway, is who's behind the wheel of that truck.
The license plate was impossible to read, but police now had probable cause to search Denofa's truck. They discovered it had been thoroughly cleaned.
We thought we possibly lost any trace evidence of Rachel being in that truck.
The first search didn't turn up any fibers, fingerprints, or blood from Rachel. But part of the truck might have withstood multiple washings. A plastic bed liner in the same area where this surveillance image showed what looked like Rachel's body.
What had happened was the black bed liner was not connected properly to the bed.
When the bed liner was removed, analysts found what looked like blood. DNA showed it was Rachel Ciani's.
I couldn't wait to hear how he would ever try to explain that Rachel Ciani's blood was in the back of his pickup truck.
When questioned by police, Denofa had an incredible explanation. He said someone else must have driven his truck.
What am I missing here? Am I the dumbest prosecutor on earth that this guy really thinks he can win this thing?
This is the last known picture of Rachel Ciani, taken by a girlfriend just hours before her murder.
For some crazy reason, she had a camera in the car. I guess young girls will do. She pulled out the camera and snapped a picture of her right opposite her in the car.
Surveillance photographs showed what appeared to be Rachel's body in Jack Denofa's red pickup truck as he drove over the bridge into New Jersey on the night of the murder. According to friends, Rachel was Denofa's favorite dancer at Diva's Gentlemen's Club.
Rachel knew him pretty well, and she told people that she thought he was a loser. A sucker is what she called him. He would give her $100, $200, sometimes $300 just for sitting next to him at Diva's. And so his money did not buy her heart, but it did buy her trust, and that would prove fatal to Rachel. She thought he was harmless.
On the night of Rachel's murder, Denofa stayed in room 223 of the motel next door to the club, but investigators found no forensic evidence in the room, so they tracked down the guest who stayed in the room directly below Denofa's room that night.
There was a man staying in the room about 3 a.m. He reported hearing a noise outside his room. A thud or a thunk. Whatever it was odd. But he did not get up to check it out.
Their rooms faced the back of the hotel, where there was little traffic late at night. On the sidewalk, below room 223, investigators noticed a dark stain.
And we thought that it could be oil, and we thought that it was odd that someone was changing oil or that their oil leaked up on the sidewalk, because the sidewalk was very close to the building. I took a white piece of paper and rubbed the stain, and when I looked at it, it was red.
A presumptive test showed this was human blood. A DNA test showed it was Rachel Ciani's.
Something went south in that room that night.
So what happened to Rachel Ciani on the night of her murder? Prosecutors say that Tuesday night was like any other. The regulars were at the Gentlemen's Club, including Jack Denofa.
Rachel Ciani was the girl that Jack Denofa always wanted, but couldn't get. And, if he couldn't win her affections with his pudgy good looks and oily charm, he would ply her with money and gifts and buy it that way. But it didn't work.
After the club closed for the night, while Rachel and her friend were talking outside, Jack returned, obviously drunk, and knocked wildly on the door. Rachel offered to walk Jack to the motel next door, where he usually stayed after a night out drinking. The evidence shows she walked him to room 223. Prosecutors believe Jack may have made some type of advance towards her, one that was rejected. Enraged, he choked Rachel until she lost consciousness. Denofa may have thought she was dead and tried to get rid of her body by putting her on the awning below his window. This way, he could lower her into his truck. But investigators believe Rachel slipped from his grasp and fell to the sidewalk, leaving the blood stain, later found by police. Denofa threw Rachel's body in the truck, and her blood seeped underneath the plastic lining of the truck bed. He drove over the bridge into New Jersey, where he was photographed with what looked like Rachel's body in the back. With little traffic on the bridge that time of night, he threw Rachel's body over the side, thinking her death would be ruled a suicide. But her blood and the fibers from her sweater were found on the side of the bridge, proof she was injured before she was thrown over, proof that it wasn't suicide.
He was buying her drinks, tipping her, and obviously trying to get something out of her that she didn't want to give him, whether it was money, sex, or drugs. And when she didn't give it to him, he got angry and he hurt her. And the total lack of respect that he had for her, he just dumps her body like she's garbage.
We can only assume how it actually started, but at least we know what happened after it started.
In November of 2002, Jack Denofa was found guilty of first-degree murder and given a sentence of 30 years to life in prison. It was a bizarre murder. 2 crime scenes were extensively cleaned, but a few spots of blood survived and pointed directly to Jack Denofa.
They didn't have much to work with in their defense. They produced no experts because I'm sure they couldn't find any that could attack the validity of the DNA or any of the other evidence.
The evidence and the eyewitness accounts kept pointing back to Jack Denofa. It would have been criminal for us to not look at him.
Jack Denofa certainly wasn't the big shot he pretended to be. He wanted to be a big shot in the worst way. You know, he wanted to own Divas when he walked in there. And he was just a small, little man, and perhaps the most incompetent killer the Bucks County's ever seen.
Up next, a violent thunderstorm provides cover for a brutal murder.
It was an absolutely brutal crime scene.
Obviously, this was a case of an overkill.
There are plenty of suspects with clear motives, but they all pass polygraph tests.
It's not 100% reliable.
If investigators didn't find the one tiny clue left at the scene, they might never have solved it. The real estate development business in Texas always seems to be active. Darrell North, a manager for a multi-billion-dollar development company, had no shortage of work.
Darrell North was in charge of building budget suites for a company out of Las Vegas, and he had been in charge of building several in this area.
Darrell had a reputation as a fair-minded boss who set high standards.
I asked a subcontractor, was Darrell hard to work for? Was he mean? And he said, no, he was not. He said he expected quality work.
I've seen Dad fire numerous subcontractors over the years. My dad had the ability to get his point across very clearly. He's very pointed. He was very direct.
Darrell was always punctual. So when he didn't come home from work one day and didn't answer his phone, his family was concerned.
When I got to the job site, it was after 11 o'clock at night. The lights of his trailer were on, and his car was out front, and I knew his car hadn't been moved because it was dry underneath his vehicle, and when everything else was just drenched.
The door was padlocked. His son knocked on the door, but got no answer.
I climbed up on the rail with a flashlight, trying to shine the flashlight into that dark office, see if Dad had a heart attack or something had happened.
Mark saw his father on the floor.
I saw Dad laying against the door, and he was just laying face down, not moving.
Paramedics and police declared Darrell North dead at the scene. He'd been stabbed repeatedly. Blood was spattered everywhere.
It was an absolutely brutal crime scene, as would be typical with any case where there's multiple stab wounds. There was a tremendous amount of blood.
There was blood in 2 of the 3 rooms. It was obvious a life and death struggle had taken place.
There was also a hole punch that was discovered in very close proximity to Mr. North's body that was bent. That would lead me or any other investigator to believe that either Mr. North may have been struck with that hole punch or Mr. North may have struck his assailant with that hole punch.
There was a trail of blood from the filing cabinet to Darrell's body, then to a desk. On top, police found a machete, the type used to clear brush from construction sites. It was perfectly clean.
It actually wasn't blood-soaked, but we didn't know if it might have been used and then cleaned off and placed there.
Darrell North's secretary told police there were normally 2 machetes in the trailer.
There was a second machete that had gone missing.
Police assumed this was the one used in the attack.
The extra wounds on the back of the head, which almost decapitated him, indicated a tremendous desire to make sure that the person was deceased.
Daryl's wallet was still in his pocket. Nothing had been stolen. There was no sign of forced entry. This and the level of violence indicated a very personal crime.
Out of the 40 cases that I worked, this was the only one that had that type of rage exhibited.
Daryl hired many contractors so his decisions could either make or break some of them. Someone's anger had spiraled out of control, but police and Daryl's family had no idea who it was. Daryl North's autopsy revealed he'd been stabbed 46 times with 2 different weapons. A clear case of overkill.
Overkill, as we define it, is wounding a person way beyond what we require to kill a person. So now we frequently see not just a few wounds, but many, and it's all indicative of rage that is going on between the two persons involved in the assault, the victim and the assailant.
A machete missing from his office was believed to be one of the murder weapons. The other was believed to be a knife.
It had a single sharp edge and a blunt edge. We could predict that it was a larger knife. Some of the wounds were at least inch and a half in width on the body surface.
The level of violence limited the family's options in terms of funeral arrangements.
It was just an absolute disaster. It was awful, just absolutely awful. And I made my mother promise that she and my sister would not go up to the funeral home and see him.
The family tried to help investigators by identifying anyone who might have had a reason to harm Daryl.
I thought it must be a stranger, that maybe was robbing him or something. I could not, in my wildest imagination, believe that someone would do that.
Daryl's secretary told police that everyone left the construction site early on the day of the murder because of the severe rainstorm. She said Daryl stayed behind to meet with a contractor named Curtis Pope.
Curtis Pope was a pool contractor. Daryl was basically mentoring Curtis into the construction business. He stayed approximately 20-25 minutes. He left Daryl. Daryl said he was going to wait out the rain and let the traffic die down before he headed home.
Daryl's wife told police Curtis Pope could not be the killer.
Curtis Pope had done some repair work on our pool. I said, please don't spend your time looking at Curtis Pope. He did not kill Daryl. Please, spend your time looking for the person that did.
Pope was distraught over Daryl's murder.
He came through the receiving line crying, and I thought he was so touched by Daryl's death. And he said, I loved Daryl. He was better to me than my own father.
Pope was 40 years old, married, with a young daughter. He did, however, have a police record consisting of arrests for petty theft. Since he was the last known person to see Daryl alive, he was automatically considered a suspect. Pope agreed to take a polygraph examination and passed.
It's not likely that somebody could come in and intentionally be untruthful and still pass a polygraph test.
The next suspect was Bob Johnson, a roofing contractor. Daryl fired Johnson just 2 weeks before his murder.
He was upset that he wasn't going to continue to work there because, according to him, Daryl had promised him continued work.
Daryl's family never met Johnson, but they'd heard of him.
Daryl had mentioned that he had had some problems with him. He usually didn't bring his problems home, and so since it was something that he had shared with me. I thought it was probably serious.
Incredibly, just 2 days after Daryl's murder, Johnson called asking to get his job back.
The superintendent felt like it was odd that Bob Johnson was calling there, when can I come to work, after the fact, after Daryl's been murdered, because his belief was that Daryl didn't want him there.
Johnson said that on the day of the murder, he was with his child in a Dallas hospital. This was verified, but he still had time to commit the murder.
The alibi wasn't sufficient enough, in my mind, to totally exclude him.
But like Curtis Pope, he too passed the polygraph examination.
The polygraph is just a tool. It's not 100% reliable. That's why it's not admissible in court.
If it hadn't rained, maybe we could have gotten fingerprints, but you can't focus on what we could have had. You've got to find what you do have.
Investigators needed forensic evidence to solve this crime and hoped to find some of it at the scene. Daryl North's murder was so violent that forensic tests were needed to make sense of what happened.
We had numerous types of blood stains. They included passive blood drops. We had smears, transfers, and frankly, there was so much blood that you'd be hard-pressed to try to classify some of it as to how it got there.
We took many samples. We took 23 samples of blood from various different parts of that crime scene.
They first had to determine if all the blood had come from Daryl North.
When the assailant is wielding a knife and he stabs a victim, oftentimes that knife blade hits bone and it stops. And oftentimes the killer's hand continues its movement and it slides down the blade and can cut the assailant.
The other clue they looked for was shoe prints. With so much blood, both the killer and the victim would have stepped in it. Crime scene technician Jim Varnon found several shoe prints and tried to enhance them with a special dye.
Amino black works because it stains proteins, and it's applied to protein stain, in this case a blood stain. Footwear impression in blood or fingerprints, latent prints in blood can be enhanced with this substance.
In several of the enhanced prints, analysts could clearly see the word Justin, a well-known brand of Texas-made boots.
We knew that these footwear impressions in blood that had the pattern of a Justin heel was most likely going to be from our assailant, because it did not match the only other bleeder at that crime scene, which was our victim.
Unfortunately, these boots weren't unique.
How common are they? You're probably not from here if you don't have a pair.
And it was impossible to tell the size of the boot from the print.
In a Justin boot heel, it is possible that you're going to have one physical size that would overlap into several different boot sizes, so that you're not going to be able to tell the precise size of the boot by looking at the size of the heel.
Nevertheless, investigators asked both suspects, Bob Johnson and pool contractor Curtis Pope, if they owned a pair of Justin brand boots. Bob Johnson owned a pair, but the heel of his boots was larger than those at the scene. Curtis Pope also owned a pair of Justin brand boots which appeared to be new and willingly turned them over to investigators.
In this case, my result was inconclusive. I could not eliminate or identify the boot as having made that mark.
When investigators talked with Pope about his boots, they noticed something they hadn't seen before. Some bruising under his eye.
He had some darkness under his left eye. There was no cut, but it was a slight bruising.
A background check revealed Pope's business was faltering.
He had a reputation of just not being very good at what he did as far as the construction of these swimming pools.
Pope's business records indicated he was deeply in debt, wasn't able to pay his suppliers, and the only big client he had left was Daryl North. If Daryl fired Pope during their meeting, it would have been the end of Pope's company.
Pope's finances were in terrible shape. He was on the fine edge of disaster all the time.
With a warrant, investigators searched Pope's home computer and found something suspicious.
Someone on that computer had visited a website on how to beat a polygraph and had in fact paid money to download a book on how to beat it.
As testing continued on the bloodstains on the floor of the crime scene, investigators noticed one blood drop on Darrell North's pants that they had previously overlooked.
There was a vertical drop on the back left pant leg of Darrell North while he's laying on the floor.
The shape of the drop was perfectly round, meaning that the origin of the blood was stationary and hit the fabric at a 90-degree angle.
The significance of such a drop falling and hitting the pants perpendicularly while Mr. North is on the floor is that it would mean that the assailant is standing above him, bleeding on him after he has been attacked. So it puts a sequencing to the events.
Max Courtney cut out the stain and submitted it for DNA testing. Investigators found 5 other drops of blood at the scene, perfectly round in between Darrell's body and the door.
And I said, why not let's just test these 5 particular drops of blood that we know or we feel like didn't come from Darrell North.
Test confirmed. The blood was not Darrell North's. There was only one question that remained. Who left the blood? One of the 2 suspects or someone else? This tiny drop of blood on the back of Darrell North's pants told an important story. Since the blood hit Darrell's pants at a 90-degree angle, it meant the killer was standing over Darrell's body while he was bleeding from his own wound, and he continued to bleed as he left the scene.
When we observed those vertical drops of blood leading away from Mr. North's body, that was a very significant thing for us to find, because we knew then that the killer's DNA was going to be present on that scene.
And there was a possible explanation for how the killer was injured. The dented 2-hole paper punch unit found near Darrell North's body. Darrell may have used it to defend himself, causing an injury, a facial cut or nosebleed. To identify the killer, DNA samples were collected from the 2 suspects, Bob Johnson and Curtis Pope. DNA testing revealed it was Curtis Pope's blood at the crime scene.
If Darrell North had not taken some steps to defend himself, causing him to bleed, this case wouldn't have been solved.
Would have never dreamed that, firing somebody, would cause somebody to, go postal.
Darrell's family couldn't believe that the man whom Darrell had mentored in business and treated in many ways like a son could have done this.
Not until the day they came out here to the house and told me that it was his DNA that had been identified did I really believe.
The bruises police noticed under Pope's eye were probably the result of the fight.
And I was able to examine his arms and his hands for injuries. He didn't have any. There was no cuts.
On the night of Darrell North's murder, the Dallas-Fort Worth area was hit with a driving rainstorm, causing flash floods and power outages. The storm was so bad, Darrell sent his construction crew home early. But he stayed behind because he had a 5 p.m. appointment with Curtis Pope. They were going to discuss quality problems with the swimming pool Pope was installing at the hotel. Pope was having financial problems. His company was headed towards bankruptcy, and Darrell North was his only large client, although it's unclear whether Darrell knew this. No one knows what the 2 men said to each other. But prosecutors believe Curtis Pope snapped and attacked Darrell with a knife. Darrell was caught off guard and struck Pope in the face with a paper punch, causing the nosebleed. Pope stabbed Darrell over 40 times. As he lay dying on the floor, a drop of blood from Pope's nose fell onto Darrell's pants, and he continued to bleed as he left the scene.
Mr. Pope might have been able to come up with an explanation about how some of the other drops of blood got in the trailer on that particular night, but there's no way he could have explained away how his blood was dripped onto Darrell North's pants.
We knew we had eliminated any possible innocent explanation for his blood being at the scene, and we felt like we had him.
Curtis Pope was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He posted bail, but on the first day of his trial, Pope didn't show up.
We learned through an informant that he was headed toward Canada.
That afternoon, police in Watertown, New York, just 25 miles from the Canadian border, stopped a car from driving the wrong way down a one-way street. It was Curtis Pope. He tried to run, but was arrested at a shopping center. Curtis Pope was returned to Texas. He stood trial and was convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison.
There is nothing good about Curtis Pope. I just think he's a sociopath and an endangerment to society.
It was an unusually bloody crime scene, but Darrell North unwittingly provided the evidence needed to convict his killer.
He probably bloodied Curtis Pope's nose. We have always thought Darrell helped to convict Curtis Pope.
The forensic evidence in this case was absolutely the linchpin of the entire case.
This case stands out to me because it is one of the best of the uses of DNA combined with bloodstain pattern analysis. We're working together, the two show who the blood came from and provide a scenario by which it possibly got there.
Before we get back to the episode, if you're listening on Spotify, please take a moment to tap 5 stars. It's one of the easiest ways to support Forensic Tales and helps the show reach new listeners. Thank you so much for being here. To enjoy this episode of Forensic Tales ad-free, check us out on Patreon. Patreon.com/Forensic Tales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
It was just after 3 a.m. in the middle of nowhere when Sacramento County Sheriff's Deputy Jeffrey Mitchell came across a white Chevy van with no plates. He called dispatch saying he was about to initiate a traffic stop and everything seemed all right. But just 7 minutes later, the dispatcher heard Mitchell's radio clicking, signaling something was really wrong. When backup officers arrived, they found Officer Mitchell lying in the ground next to his patrol car. He had been shot in the head with his own service weapon. Days later, the van was found with 2 dead bodies inside. This is Forensic Tales, episode number 243, The Murder of Deputy Jeffrey Mitchell. Welcome to Forensic Tales. I'm your host, Courtney Fretwell Areola. Forensic Tales is a weekly true crime podcast with a forensic science twist. Each episode features real stories highlighting how forensic science was used, from fingerprinting to criminal profiling to DNA. Some cases have been solved with forensic science, while others have turned cold. Every story sends us a chilling reminder that not all stories have happy endings. Before we get to the episode, we've got a new Patreon supporter to thank this week, Jules C. Now, let's get to this week's episode. In 2006, 38-year-old Jeffrey Mitchell worked as a deputy for the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department in Sacramento, California, a police force that today has around 180 employees. He was born on May 28, 1968, to parents Gary and Mary in Campbell, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area. As a kid, he got really into playing sports, especially baseball. He eventually became a coach for his son's baseball team and for El Dorado Hills Little League South. Deputy Mitchell played baseball for all 4 seasons at Westmount High School and earned a place on the All-League team as a senior outfielder for the championship club in 1986. He was known by his teammates as one of the hardest working players on the team, something that would stick with him throughout his entire life. He graduated from Westmont High in 1986, but instead of going away to college right away like most people probably thought he would, he surprised everyone by enlisting as an officer in the U.S. Air Force. During his service, he was sent to Kuwait to help with the Persian Gulf War. And after 5 years, he left the Air Force and returned to school, this time for college. He returned back to Northern California and enrolled at the California State University, Sacramento, where he would eventually meet the woman he was going to marry, Crystal. The two instantly connected, and not long after finishing his degree, he proposed to Crystal, and they got married in August of 1995. Deputy Mitchell spent the first few years after college graduation working as a substitute teacher, but he eventually joined the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department in 1997. His first job there was working as a physical education instructor, but by 2000, he had graduated from the academy and became a sworn deputy. Like most rookie sheriff's deputies, he worked in the jails for the first 2 years, but after putting in a ton of hard work, he was promoted to patrol in 2002. Deputy Mitchell was given the graveyard shift, which meant that he worked overnight, a shift that most people probably wouldn't voluntarily sign up for. But he was sort of the odd man out because he really didn't mind doing it. Working the graveyard meant that he could be home during the day with his wife and son, Jake. During what would be his 9-year career with the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, all of Deputy Mitchell's coworkers and supervisors described him as an outstanding police officer. He was always willing to go above and beyond and took his role as a cop very seriously. One of his best traits was said to be his compassion. No matter who he met during the line of duty, he always treated people with respect and compassion, which is just one of the many reasons why what happened to him was so senseless. Let's now go to the early morning hours of Friday, October 27th, 2006. That night, Deputy Mitchell was scheduled to work his typical shift. He usually left the house around 9 or 10 p.m., worked anywhere from 10 to 12 hours, and then would return home between 7 and 9 in the morning. But that morning turned out different. He never made it home. When he started his shift on Thursday night, he had no idea what type of calls would be coming in. Sometimes he responded to calls about people selling drugs, drunk drivers, or even missing people. Other calls were just simple traffic stops, a broken taillight, or maybe speeding. As a patrol deputy, it was his job to be ready for whatever came his way. He was about halfway through his shift when he patrolled an unincorporated area of Sacramento County near Dillard Road, a location about 30 miles away from downtown Sacramento. During the daytime, this area of Highway 16 would have been a pretty drive. You've got wide open fields on both sides of the road, and most people who live out there have beautiful farms and ranches. But at nighttime, it looked completely different. There are hardly any lights out there, and you could go miles without seeing anything. Sometime between 3:20 and 3:25 a.m., Deputy Mitchell used his vehicle computer to tell the sheriff's dispatch that he was approaching a white Chevy van without license plates and planned to initiate a traffic stop. The van was near the intersection of Dillard and Mace Roads of Highway 16 and south of Jackson Highway. It was pitch dark out there with no other cars around. At first, everything about the call seemed relatively fine. It was supposed to be a completely normal traffic stop. Deputy Mitchell would ask about the missing license plates, maybe or maybe not give the driver a ticket, since in the state of California, you have to have license plates on both the front and back of your car, and that would probably be it. The driver would go in his car, and the same for Deputy Mitchell. The entire interaction would probably take less than 5 minutes. Now, the details of this next part are a little unclear, but apparently, Deputy Mitchell said in his radio call that he thought there was only one other person in the car, but as we'll find out later, there might have been more. Over the next 7 minutes, this seemingly normal traffic stop turned deadly. The first sign of trouble came when the police dispatcher didn't hear from Deputy Mitchell when they tried following up with him just a couple minutes later. Then at 3:34 a.m., Deputy Mitchell's radio was keyed, like someone was holding down the talk button but wasn't saying anything. Seconds later, it happened again. Now, this can happen for a lot of reasons. He could have just accidentally held down the talk button on his radio. But when it happened a second time, it seemed less likely to be just an accident. So this particular dispatcher thought it was worth following up on, just to make sure that everything was okay. So he radioed Deputy Mitchell directly to get his attention, but he didn't get a response. Next, he tried calling his personal cell phone. Nothing there either. 12 seconds later, the dispatcher radioed a Code 3 call to all deputies on duty. Head to Mitchell's location right away with lights and sirens. There are some conflicting reports about the exact time that backup officers arrived, but the consensus seems to be that they got there at 3:37 a.m., 10 minutes after Deputy Mitchell's initial report of the stop, and 3 minutes after the Code 3 was issued. When the first officer got there, he saw his fellow officer and friend lying on the side of the road next to the bumper of his patrol car. Ballistic testing would later confirm that he had been shot once in the head with his own service weapon. Additional officers started arriving on the scene and began performing CPR. Paramedics arrived at 3:59 a.m., and Deputy Mitchell was airlifted to the UC Davis Medical Center. But despite the fast response of the first responding officers and the hospital staff, he was pronounced dead at 4:45. He was just 38 years old, leaving behind a wife and a son. Within minutes of all this happening, this normally remote and quiet area of Sacramento County was now a crime scene with hundreds of law enforcement officers all wondering the same thing. Who shot him, and was it connected to the traffic stop? The first clue they had was Deputy Mitchell's radio call, the one about stopping the white van for not having visible license plates. It made sense that whoever was inside the van also saw what happened to him. But when the backup officers arrived, the van wasn't there anymore. And since this happened in the middle of nowhere in the dead of night, there weren't any eyewitnesses. So the first priority became finding this missing white Chevy. The Sacramento County Sheriff's Office wasn't alone in the search. They quickly got help from the FBI, the California Highway Patrol, and several neighboring police departments. If any agency saw it or a van that looked like it, they were asked to call it in so that it could be stopped and questioned. They knew the driver of the van had a head start. But if they could get police officers stationed everywhere throughout Sacramento, then they might have a chance at tracking it down. You can't just gun down a police officer and not expect every available law enforcement agency within a couple 100 miles to start looking for the shooter. And that's exactly what happened. Back at the scene where the shooting happened, there were two big clues. Mitchell's service weapon, which someone had gotten their hands on and shot him with, and number two, his handcuffs were on the ground like he had tried to use them. This is what then Sacramento County Sheriff's John McGinnis told reporters at the time, quote, "This may be a hunch and we may never know the answer, but it is my belief that there was something that heightened his response because it does look like he had begun to handcuff a suspect," end quote. There were also obvious signs that Deputy Mitchell was engaged in a very violent attack and fought for his life before being shot. So pretty early on, this is what the police theorized happened. The traffic stop started completely normal and calm, but at some point, Deputy Mitchell became concerned about something and initiated an arrest. He was either patting the person down or attempting to put handcuffs on them when he was attacked. And during all of that, the person was able to grab his service weapon and shoot him with it. After that, this person drove away in the white van. But like I said, Deputy Mitchell didn't go down without a fight. He was in great physical shape and was a pretty decent-sized guy. So he would have been able to put up a pretty good fight until the point the person grabbed his gun. Sacramento investigators also thought that maybe more than one person could be involved. No matter how physically strong he was, it was Deputy Mitchell versus a man with a gun, or deputy versus two guys with a gun. It wouldn't have been a fair fight. When it comes to the radio clicking, we don't know whether he did it on purpose to signal that he needed help, or that it was just an accident that happened during the struggle. Either way, and either one is a possibility. But it was a good thing it happened because that's what first signaled that something was wrong and alerted backup. On a roadside fence near the scene, the police noticed that part of it was damaged, like maybe someone had run their car into it. This led the police to wonder if the white van had any type of front end damage to it. But that was just a theory they had in the beginning. Eventually, the police discovered that the fence had been damaged well before all of this happened, so likely had nothing to do with the investigation. In a press conference held on Friday morning, Sacramento County Sheriff John McGinnis pleaded with the public for help in finding the missing van. And within the first few hours, they received a lot of tips from the public about possible sightings. But it wasn't until 12 hours later that they finally found it. And it only deepened the mystery of what really happened to Deputy Mitchell. The van was found floating half submerged in a river down below Highway 49 in El Dorado County. From where Deputy Mitchell was killed, that's about a 30-minute drive away or 28 miles. Now, if that doesn't sound strange, this definitely will. Inside were two bodies, one male and one female. The male was found slumped over the steering wheel, and the female was in the passenger seat. At first, investigators weren't 100% sure that this really was the van they were searching for, but they had a pretty good feeling that it was. The van had a front license plate, but it was bent upward, so it's possible that Deputy Mitchell just didn't see it. But oddly enough, when it was pulled from the water, investigators discovered that it still had the back license plate on it. So it actually had both plates. So maybe Deputy Mitchell just saw the bent front license plate and not the back one. Either way, under California law, drivers are supposed to have visible license plates on both the front and the back. So if Deputy Mitchell just didn't see the bent front plate, then he was still technically able and legally allowed to pull them over. But this also gave investigators some pause at first on whether this really was the van that he had just pulled over 12 hours earlier. The two people found dead inside were eventually identified as the van's registered owner, 43-year-old Alan Schubert, and his friend, 28-year-old Nicole Welch. Both of them were last seen alive at 9 p.m. on October 26th. Alan was from Sacramento, and his friend Nicole was from about 50 miles away in the North Highlands area. Autopsies revealed that they had both died of carbon monoxide poisoning. Initially, the sheriff said that the van could have gotten stuck in the river, causing a water backup in its tailpipe, but that was eventually ruled out. What was also strange was that the van wasn't fully submerged in the water. It was just pretty much to the tires that were underneath the water. So if either Alan or Nicole wanted to get out, they could. They could just simply open the doors and get out if they had somehow gotten stuck in the water. So, did someone else drive the car into the river, carrying Alan and Nicole's body? Well, this question leads to another theory. Alan and Nicole died from carbon monoxide poisoning before their car was dumped in the river. And if that's true, then yes, someone else would have had to have driven it there. It also means that both Nicole and Alan were likely already dead when Deputy Mitchell initiated the traffic stop on their van. Neither one of them had any physical injuries on their body, like they had been in a fight. So it seems unlikely that they were the ones who reached for the gun. And remember, Deputy Mitchell apparently said that there was only one person in the van when he was about to pull it over. So could someone else have killed Alan and Nicole, and while they were on their way to dump the bodies, Mitchell pulled him or her over for the bent front license plate? Let's now talk about who exactly Alan Schubert and Nicole Welch are. Well, here's everything I know about them. Alan Schubert had a criminal record that included charges for vandalism, DUI, and drug possession. And according to his family members, he hadn't driven with a valid license in over 10 years. Most of his arrest stemmed from his regular use of methamphetamines. At the time of his death, Alan was living in the van and sometimes working as a handyman. According to family and friends, he was taking his friend Nicole Welch up to Jackson to visit some friends. He probably didn't plan to be gone very long because he had an upcoming court appearance in downtown Sacramento that his family says that he would never miss. When the cops questioned Alan's girlfriend if she thought that maybe he could have killed himself, her answer was no. She didn't think that he would because they had plans to move in together and he wasn't depressed. Plus, he had his friend Nicole with him. So if he ever planned on taking his own life, then why would he also kill her? Now, when it comes to 28-year-old Nicole Welch, I wasn't able to find much about her except that she was friends with Alan Schubert. Other than that, I really don't have any information on her. So now the big question becomes, was this the same van that Deputy Mitchell pulled over? And if so, did Alan or Nicole have anything to do with his murder? Over the next several days, the police processed the van for forensic evidence, interviewed the families of Alan and Nicole, poured over thousands of tips, and investigated every lead that came in. But they had trouble getting any answers to those questions. Yes, it seems likely that it was the same white van, but there's no way to be 100% sure. The only fingerprints and DNA they found inside of the van belonged to either Nicole or Alan, and none of it implicated them in the murder. So by all accounts, they're both considered victims too. The Sacramento police don't consider them as suspects in Deputy Mitchell's murder, and still to this day, their cases remain unsolved too. So none of this made any sense. The circumstances of that morning, the time of day, the lack of substantial forensic evidence at the scene, no eyewitnesses, nothing. All of this made it a very, very difficult case for investigators to process. Where do you even begin in a case like this? Well, the police honed in on the town of Wilton, the nearest community to the shooting. According to the website SF Gate, at the time, Wilton only had about 4,500 residents, and just about every one of them became a suspect. People started looking at each other wondering, could you be the person responsible? No one could really trust one another, thinking that there was a cop killer somewhere out there on the loose. But no arrests were ever made. Now, I mentioned a few minutes ago that there was a lack of substantial forensic evidence at the crime scene. Well, the police did have something, a small amount of unknown DNA. Here is what Sacramento County Sheriff John McGinnis said in a news report for TSPN, quote, "The DNA was found at a very critical, specific location at the scene, and we've determined that the donor is a person other than Officer Mitchell," end quote. So based on that statement, we really don't know where the DNA was found. It could have been on his service weapon or maybe his radio, but we don't know that for sure. The police are keeping that particular detail a secret for one reason or another. So we've got DNA. Now what? Well, there's a problem with it, and it's probably the reason why this case still hasn't been solved. The police only have a partial DNA profile, which is insufficient to identify a match in the National DNA Database. The sample is just too small to get any hits. All we know for sure is that it doesn't belong to Deputy Mitchell, so we can only assume that it belongs to the killer. On top of the partial DNA profile, They also found fingerprints at the scene that didn't belong to Mitchell either. But just like the DNA, they haven't found any matches yet. Detectives went door to door in Wilton, speaking with people and asking for a DNA sample to compare to what they found at the crime scene. They even reportedly went to the same guy's house at least 4 separate times to speak with him. But none of that yielded anything significant. We don't know why they went to that guy's house so many times, and no one from Wilton was ever arrested. At one point, the sheriff's office announced that 4 people in custody on unrelated charges were considered persons of interest in the case. However, ultimately, no arrests were made there either. So within just a matter of a few weeks, the case was in danger of turning cold. Jeffrey Mitchell's memorial service was held on Thursday, November 3rd at Sutter Health Baseball Park in Sacramento, a field that is now home to the Sacramento Rivercats minor league baseball team. More than 4,000 people attended the public service, including thousands of law enforcement officers from across the state. His public funeral was the only time they stopped actively working on the case. But as soon as the service wrapped up, they went right back to work, putting up more than 20 billboards across the state about the case. And a $225,000 reward was being offered for any new information. But by the end of the year, the case was at a standstill. More than 14,000 man-hours had been used, and the sheriff's office was rumored to have spent more than $1 million on it, more than half of that amount going to the department's overtime. Several years later, in 2013, the sheriff's office announced that it was retesting the DNA since testing had come a long way by then. But unfortunately, a full DNA profile still hasn't been created. Later that same year, the authorities announced that they were confident that the white van found in the river was definitely connected to the case. For a while, there had been some doubt about whether it really was. But that doesn't really mean that they thought either Alan or Nicole had anything to do with his murder. In fact, the authorities pretty much think that they're probably victims too. This now brings us to some of the theories surrounding this case. The first one is one that we've already touched on. Alan and Nicole were already dead inside the van when Deputy Mitchell pulled them over, and someone else was driving the van on the way to dump the bodies. But who would have had motive to shoot and kill a police officer during a simple traffic stop? Well, there's your answer. If you're on your way to dispose of 2 bodies that you have in a van that you're driving and you get pulled over, then that might give you motive. That could explain why Deputy Mitchell said that there was only one person in the car. He probably only saw the driver. But when he approached the van, that's when he might have seen one or both of the bodies. Then after that, Deputy Mitchell tried handcuffing the driver, but things escalated and the guy was able to get his service weapon and shoot him. This also explains why the van was dumped where it was. If either Nicole or Alan wanted to get out, they could have, because it was only really half of the tires that were submerged. They could have easily just opened the door and got out. That's if they were alive. But that theory doesn't explain everything, like how or why they died. Where did the carbon monoxide come from? And is the same person who killed Deputy Mitchell also responsible for murdering them? If so, why? What's his or her connection to Nicole and Alan? And what would be his motivation for killing them in such a strange way? How did he do it? Plus, is it really possible that at the same exact time you're dumping 2 dead bodies, you get pulled over by the cops? I guess it's possible, but the timing of that just seems so unlucky at the very least. So that's one theory. What about the others? Well, the second theory is that this white van actually had nothing to do with Deputy Mitchell's murder at all, and the deaths of Alan and Nicole are completely unrelated to this. So in other words, Deputy Mitchell pulled over a different van that night. Well, this theory seems to be the one that the police believe in the least. That's because in 2013, they pretty much said that they're confident the van is the one that Deputy Mitchell pulled over that night. And if that's the case, it certainly did have something to do with it. There isn't some other white van just running around somewhere. But what if Nicole and Alan weren't already dead when Officer Mitchell pulled them over? What if they were still alive? Or what if they were the only two people inside and something else happened to them afterward? After shooting Deputy Mitchell, they poisoned themselves with the carbon monoxide. That's another theory I guess you could say is out there. Now, there's a couple things I want to say about that. Neither Nicole nor Alan had a history of violent crimes, suggesting that they would be capable of something like that. Most, if not all, of Alan's arrests were related to drugs or alcohol. He was never thought as a violent person or anything like that. Alan's mom, Carolyn Rogers, said that since he'd been pulled over by the cops so many times in the past, he would have been pretty much used to it. And that meant that he wouldn't have put up any type of fight. He would have just suffered the consequences and taken the whole thing with a grain of salt. He certainly wouldn't have gotten into a fight with Deputy Mitchell, stolen his service weapon, and then shot and killed him. That's just not the kind of person that he was, according to his mom. Plus, like I mentioned earlier, neither one of them had any injuries to their bodies, suggesting that they had been in a fight. The only thing, from the autopsy at least, was the carbon monoxide, which is just bizarre in and of itself. What motive would Alan or Nicole have to do this themselves? Well, if you might remember, according to Alan's family, he hadn't had a valid driver's license in about 10 years. So maybe after Deputy Mitchell pulled him over, Alan was about to be arrested for not having a valid driver's license. Could that be the motive? He just didn't want to go to jail again? Then finally, the last theory is that something happened to Deputy Mitchell after his interaction with the white van. But does that even make sense? Deputy Mitchell's police radio started clicking within minutes of initiating the stop. It doesn't seem like there would have been enough time to finish with a traffic stop, have the van drive away, and then something else happened to him. I guess it's possible that another car pulled up while Deputy Mitchell was talking to the people inside of the white van. And they're the ones that are responsible for shooting him. But we don't have any evidence of that. The only car we know for sure that he interacted with that night was that van. So anything else would just be pure speculation. Officer Jeffrey Mitchell's memory is everywhere. Not just in Sacramento, but across the country. The first place is on Memorial Plaque number 20 on the California Peace Officers Memorial Foundation's bronze monument in downtown, right across the street from the west steps of the Capitol building. There are also memorials of him at the Sacramento Police and Sheriff Memorial, the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial in Washington, D.C., the Sacramento Sheriff's Office Memorial Rose Garden, and a memorial wall in the administrative area of the Rio Correctional Center. At the location of Officer Mitchell's murder, there is a permanent memorial dedicated to him, including a memorial roadway dedication sign. Although there's no exact address for the sign, you can reach it by using simply the address range of 14058 through 14020 Mace Road in the community of Sloghouse. The Deputy Jeff Mitchell Baseball Field, or JMF, was built on August 29, 2009, and is a dedicated Little League baseball field. This was a truly special project in his memory because of how much he loved coaching and playing baseball. When Officer Mitchell was gunned down, he left behind a wife and a young son. He had spent the last 9 years of his life with the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, and he was only 38 years old, with his entire life still ahead of him with his family. Everyone who knew him, including the police, is still dedicated to finding his killer. As long as this murder is unsolved, I will fight for him, Crystal Mitchell told CBS 13 reporters in an interview in 2011, and that promise still rings true today. As I sit here to record this episode today, It's now been almost 18 years since he was murdered. The police have in their possession both fingerprints and a partial DNA profile of who they believe is the gunman. They also have at least 2 persons of interest that they haven't been able to rule out yet. But we don't know who they are because their names haven't been made public. We also don't know why they haven't been arrested yet and are only considered, quote, persons of interest. I guess there's just not enough evidence against them yet. So what are the chances of this case still being solved? And how can forensic science finally catch a cop killer? I think our biggest chance is that if we can finally create a complete DNA profile. Once we have a full profile, we can either look for exact matches in the National DNA Database, or we can look for family members. Maybe a relative of the killer has already submitted their DNA to one of these public databases, like GEDmatch or 23andMe. Not everyone knows this, that once you submit your DNA to one of those websites to basically find out more about where you come from or more about your heritage, you essentially agree to have your DNA be searchable by law enforcement. So if you share DNA with someone who's committed a crime, then you might be the reason that that person, that family member, gets arrested. That's how so many suspects from old cold cases are being caught nowadays. Their relatives are submitting their DNA to these public searchable databases, and that's how their DNA is being connected to crime scenes. So I think the same thing can happen in this case once we have a full profile. Being able to identify just one distant relative of the suspect would be huge. If we could do that, it would at least get the ball rolling on something new, open up new doors that maybe have previously been closed shut or even locked. It could also help eliminate a lot of people as possible suspects so that law enforcement can really focus their attention on the right people. I've mentioned a few times that the police have at least 2 possible persons of interest that they basically haven't been able to eliminate over the years. Well, if we could finally get a complete and full DNA profile, then those 2 people could either be ruled in or they could be ruled out. If either one of them is the gunman, we can move forward and arrest them. But if neither matches, then it's simply time to move on from them, and we can finally put any suspicions about them, about these 2 people, to bed. Assuming the DNA hasn't become too degraded or too contaminated over the years, I think the case could benefit from a private lab specializing in genetic genealogy or advanced DNA testing to take a look at it. We've covered so many cases on the show where these private labs like Parabon Nanolabs or Othram out there in Texas have tested DNA samples that most state or county-run crime labs simply can't. A lot of publicly funded crime labs just don't have the same type of resources or the equipment that these private labs do. And that's why companies like Othram or Parabon Nanolabs are able to test really, really small amounts of DNA. Just the other week on the show, we covered a case where the amount of DNA the police had was the equivalent to a, quote, gnat's eyebrow or gnat's eyelash. And one of these private labs was able to generate a full profile that eventually led to an identification. So no matter how small or partial the sample is, I think it's worth reaching out to one of these genetic genealogy labs to see if there's anything they can do with it. Or at least help law enforcement build a complete profile from it and go from there. It's also worth sending all the evidence in the case to a private lab for advanced testing, not just the already discovered DNA. It's possible that other pieces of evidence contain the killer's DNA, and we just don't know about it yet. I'm thinking Deputy Mitchell's patrol car, his handcuffs, his uniform, anything and everything that might still be stored in evidence somewhere. The same can be said about any evidence from the white van where Alan and Nicole's bodies were found. I know the police swept it for evidence when it was first discovered, but it's worth going back and looking again. We already know that the police have said that they don't think Nicole or Alan had anything to do with it. and they're probably victims as well. Well, good, detailed DNA testing could officially give us answers to all of that. Plus, if someone else drove the van with their bodies inside of it, then maybe their DNA or fingerprints could still be recovered from the steering wheel or somewhere else inside the van. But that's all assuming the police still have it in their possession, which I don't know if they do or not. The Sacramento police said that they were retesting all the forensic evidence in 2013, but that was 10 years ago, and DNA testing has gotten even better since then. So if law enforcement could get some help from any private lab, then I think there's still a really good chance that they can get a full DNA profile created of the shooter. And we can also figure out what happened to Nicole and Alan, because I think whoever killed Deputy Mitchell also knows what happened to them. The most recent update by the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department on the case was on their Facebook page on October 27th, 2021. In the post, they outlined the basic details of the case and says, quote, "To this day, we still don't know what happened on that fateful night. The killer of Deputy Mitchell remains at large. Sheriff's Department detectives are still diligently working this heinous crime that continues to haunt this community. Local media continue to remind the public that this murder took the life of this dedicated officer, husband, father, and son. We will not give up on this investigation until we have the person responsible for the fatal wound that took the life of Deputy Jeffrey Mitchell arrested and sentenced for his murder. Anyone with information regarding the white van or homicide of Deputy Jeff Mitchell, please contact the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department." End quote. The phone number for the SSD tip line is 916-874-5070. What do you think happened to Deputy Mitchell in 2006 on that lonely stretch of highway in Sacramento? Do you think the two people inside the white van were already dead when he initiated that traffic stop? Or have you come up with your own theories about what might have happened? And do you think the DNA in this case will finally be what solves it? To share your thoughts on this week's episode, follow the show on Instagram and Facebook. To find out what I think about the case, sign up to become a patron at patreon.com/forensictales. After each episode, I release a bonus episode sharing my personal thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Forensic Tales so you don't miss an episode. We release a new episode every Monday. If you love the show, consider leaving us a positive review. You can also help support the show through Patreon. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Please join me next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell Areola. For a small monthly contribution, you can help create new compelling cases for the show, help fund research, and assist with production and editing costs. For supporting the show, you'll become one of the first to listen to new ad-free episodes and gain access to exclusive content. To learn more, please visit patreon.com/Forensic Tales. Forensic Tales is a podcast made possible by our Patreon producers, Tony A., Christine B., Sherry A., Michael D., Nicola, Jerry M., Brian W., Megan G., Ureli, Jerry, Ann F., Ken S., Carol A., Luis B., and Marianne C. If you'd like to become a producer of the show, head over to our Patreon page or send me an email at courtney@forensictales.com. For a complete list of sources used in this episode, please visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings. Before we get back to the episode, if you're listening on Spotify, please take a moment to tap 5 stars. It's one of the easiest ways to support Forensic Tales and helps the show reach new listeners. Thank you so much for being here. To enjoy this episode of Forensic Tales ad-free, check us out on Patreon. Patreon.com/Forensic Tales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
On the afternoon of July 26, 2009, Diane Schuler sped the wrong way on the Taconic State Parkway and crashed into another car, killing 8 people. The toxicology report showed that she consumed a large amount of alcohol prior to the accident. But her family believes something else happened. This is Forensic Tales, episode number 241, the story of Diane Schuler and the Taconic State Parkway crash. Welcome to Forensic Tales. I'm your host, Courtney Fretwell Areola. Forensic Tales is a weekly true crime podcast with a forensic science twist. Each episode features real stories highlighting how forensic science was used, from fingerprinting to criminal profiling to DNA. Some cases have been solved with forensic science, while others have turned cold. Every story sends us a chilling reminder that not all stories have happy endings. As a one-woman show, your support helps me find new compelling cases, conduct in-depth fact-based research, and produce and edit this weekly show. You can support my work in 2 simple ways. Become a valued patron at patreon.com/Forensic Tales and leave a positive review. Now, let's get to this week's episode. 15 years ago, almost to the day, Daniel and Diane Schuler woke up around 6 to have coffee and clean out their boat and camper at Hunter Lake Campground in New York. They had spent the weekend camping with their 2 kids, Aaron and Brian, as well as their 3 nieces, Emma, Allison, and Kate. No one knew it yet, but their day was about to end in tragedy. At around 1:30 p.m., the minivan that Diane was driving, carrying all 5 children, traveled 1.7 miles in the wrong direction on the parkway, colliding head-on with an SUV. The crash left 8 people dead: Diane, her daughter, her 3 nieces, and the 3 people inside the SUV. What caused Diane to drive on the wrong way of the road with a car full of kids? Let's see if the forensic evidence can help us answer that. On the last weekend of July 2009, Diane Schuler and her husband Daniel went on a camping trip. They took with them their daughter, 2-year-old Aaron, their son, 5-year-old Brian, and 3 nieces, 8-year-old Emma, 7-year-old Allison, and 5-year-old Kate. Emma, Allison, and Kate were Diane's brother Warren's kids. Warren Hance and his wife Jackie were supposed to go on this camping trip with them, but they ended up making other plans instead. But the girls had gone on this camping trip with their aunt and uncle the year before, and they all had a really great time. So there was no reason to worry about them going again this year. Now, originally Diane had told Jackie that another adult that they all knew was going to go on the trip as well. But for some reason, those plans fell through. And the only adults there that weekend were Diane and Daniel. Both families lived in West Babylon on Long Island in New York. Diane worked days as the director of billing and collections at Cablevision, and Daniel worked nights as a security officer for the Parks Department. Their different schedules meant that they didn't really see that much of each other during the week, and Diane was usually the one who took care of the children, and pretty much anything else that needed to be done around the house. It was like she had 2 full-time jobs. Daniel's mom would even jokingly refer to Daniel as Diane's 3rd child. That weekend, they camped at the Hunter Lake Campground in Parksville, New York, located in the Catskill Mountains. The Schulers kept their camper there and went at least once every summer. Daniel went to the campground first so that he could set everything up. Then Diane and the children headed up to Hunter Lake in the Hanses' minivan that they let her borrow. She needed a car that could hold all of the kids, so Warren and Jackie let her borrow theirs. By all accounts, the weekend went off without a hitch. They went boating, fishing, exploring, made s'mores, and just hung around the campfire. But all of that was about to change come Sunday morning. Sunday, July 26th. Daniel woke up early to start cleaning up the campsite so that they could all leave later that morning. About an hour later, he woke up Diane. They both had coffee, ate breakfast, and then loaded up all the kids' stuff in the minivan. The plan was for Daniel to drive his own pickup truck home with the family dog, and for Diane to use the Hanses' minivan to take all of the kids. So that's what they did. At 9:30, they were all packed up and ready to head home. But what should have been a simple and straightforward 2.5-hour drive home turned into a nearly 4-hour mystery filled with strange phone calls and unexpected stops. As they left the campground, Daniel followed behind the minivan until they got to the parkway. And that's when he took off in his pickup truck because Diane was going to make a few stops with the kids before heading home. The first stop was to a McDonald's to get the kids some breakfast. So at 9:56 a.m., they arrived at a McDonald's in Liberty, New York. From the security cameras, we know the kids ate breakfast and played a little bit inside the restaurant's play area. Diane ordered orange juice and an iced coffee, no food. A seemingly small detail that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. After breakfast, they made a second stop. At 10:46, Diane stopped at a Sunoco gas station in Liberty. Security cameras there showed her walk into the gas station and briefly talk to the store clerk before walking back out to the van. The video doesn't have any audio, so we only know what the store clerk said happened. But apparently, Diane asked him if they had a specific type of over-the-counter pain medication, like Advil or Tylenol. But the clerk said they didn't carry what she was looking for, so she left. If you want to watch the video for yourself, you can. It's available online. So at 10:58, Diane pulled out of the gas station and headed south on Route 17, going toward Long Island. By this time, Daniel was already back at home and was asleep because he had to work that night. About 40 minutes later, at 11:37, came the first of many phone calls that day. 8-year-old Emma called her dad from Diane's cell phone and told him that they might be running a bit late. Warren asked to speak with Diane just to make sure, and Diane confirmed the same thing. They might be a little bit late because they were stuck in traffic. Now, Warren thought that Diane sounded completely normal, so there was no reason just yet to worry. So after speaking with her, he hung up and didn't think twice about it. But was Diane really completely normal at this point? Just minutes after this phone call, dozens of witnesses saw the red minivan driving aggressively on Route 17 between 11:30 and 12 noon. One witness said later on that they saw Diane pull over about 11:45 and watched as she bent over the side of the road like she was throwing up. That same witness said that just a few minutes later, the minivan passed them on the highway and was swerving in and out of traffic. Other witnesses said that they saw things like Diane aggressively honking her horn for no reason at all, or moving in and out of lanes going at a really high rate of speed, straddling 2 lanes at the same time, or flashing her headlights for no apparent reason to other drivers. All signs seemingly suggesting that Aunt Diane isn't, quote, completely normal. At 12:08 p.m., Jackie called Diane to ask how many tickets that she would need for Emma's upcoming school show. In fact, Emma had play practice later that same day, which Diane was aware of. They only spoke for about 2 minutes, but like the earlier call with Warren, Jackie thought that Diane seemed fine. Between that phone call just before 1 o'clock, things are pretty quiet. It wasn't until 12:55 that a wrong number was dialed from Diane's cell phone. The call only lasted 17 seconds. Then 3 minutes later, Diane called Jackie again. But something about this particular phone call was different. Jackie thought that her sister-in-law sounded a little bit off. She didn't sound like the person that she had known for years. They were on the phone with each other for about 2.5 minutes before the call dropped, or Diane hung up on her. We're not 100% sure. 6 minutes later, at 1:01 p.m., Warren walked into the house just as the call between Jackie and Diane ended. Jackie told him all about the strange call, so Warren decided to call his sister and speak with her directly just to make sure that everything was okay. The two spoke for about 8 minutes, and even though we don't know exactly what was said, it seems like this phone call was the one that really made Warren and Jackie worry about her and the kids. Warren said that he thought Diane seemed disoriented. At one point, she even called him by her husband's name, Daniel. During the same phone call, Diane pulled the car over and let her niece speak with him. She sounded upset and told her dad that there was, quote, something wrong with Aunt Diane. She said her aunt couldn't see straight. Not only was that weird, but in the background, he could hear the rest of the kids crying. So that's when he decided that enough was enough. He asked Emma where they were so that he could come and get them. She said she thought she saw signs for Sleepy Hollow and Tarrytown, but wasn't really sure. Fearing that something was really, really wrong, Warren got back on the phone with Diane and said, "Hey, I need you to wait there. I'm going to come and get you guys." But she didn't wait. Instead, she hung up the phone and kept driving. At 1:10 p.m., 4 more wrong numbers were dialed back-to-back from Diane's cell phone. Then she got rid of it. Sometime between 1:10 and 1:15, she pulled the minivan over, left her phone on the concrete guardrail just past the toll booths, and drove off. It wasn't found until after the crash. Warren called her phone pretty much at that same exact time, 1:15 p.m., but it went to voicemail. After that, he called more than a dozen times over the next 20 minutes, and all of them went straight to voicemail. Now, the worst part of the story. Shortly after 1:30 p.m., Diane made a right-hand turn from Pleasantville Road onto the exit ramp for the Taconic State Parkway. She drove the wrong way, south into northbound traffic at over 75 miles per hour, and continued doing so for 1.7 miles. Along the way, dozens of drivers were forced to move out of her way or be hit head-on. Fortunately, most of these drivers were able to get out of her way, but one car wasn't so lucky. As Diane headed in the wrong direction, she crashed head-on into an SUV carrying 3 people. 81-year-old Michael Bastardi, his son, 49-year-old Guy Bastardi, and their friend, 74-year-old Daniel Longo. Then their SUV crashed into another car, a 2002 Chevrolet Tracker carrying 2 other people. The accident left 8 people dead: Diane, her daughter, 3 nieces, and the 3 men inside the SUV. The only ones to survive were Diane's son Brian and the 2 people inside the Chevy Tracker. Brian suffered a serious brain injury, and the 2 people inside the Chevy walked away with only minor injuries. The entire event took less than 3 minutes, but it quickly became one of the deadliest motor vehicle crashes the state of New York had ever seen. In fact, a crash like this hadn't happened in the county since 20 people died in 1934. So what happened to Diane to cause her to drive on the wrong side of the road, leaving 7 others dead? Was this some tragic accident and she somehow didn't see the wrong way signs? Or was this intentional? And if it was, why? Let's get into the forensic evidence. Right after the crash happened, 2 people who witnessed it immediately jumped out of their cars and ran to go help. And as they pulled Diane out of the minivan, they saw something that changed everything: a smashed bottle of Absolute vodka. It was just sitting there on the floor on the side of the driver's side, and apparently had come from Diane and Daniel's campground. They always kept a bottle of vodka there during the summer. So, was Diane drunk at the time? Well, a full toxicology run-up was done at Diane's autopsy, and here's what the medical examiner wrote inside of his report. He said that Diane's blood alcohol level was a whopping 0.19%, with another 6 grams of alcohol just sitting in her stomach yet to be absorbed. On top of being drunk, she also had high levels of THC in her system, enough to suggest that she could have smoked marijuana as recently as 15 minutes before the crash. So this completely changed everything. Not only was everyone shocked by the tragedy of the crash itself, but now you've got allegations that the driver who caused it was both drunk and high. A mom driving her 2 kids and 3 nieces. But here's the thing. Diane's family, mainly her husband Daniel, didn't think that she was drunk. Let's talk about it. We know the medical examiner's report said that her blood alcohol content was well above the legal driving limit for the state of New York. In fact, some reports indicate that she could have had the equivalent of 10 drinks. And that's not even including the undigested alcohol in her stomach. Plus, you've got marijuana, which only enhances the effects of alcohol. So obviously the authorities said that, yes, she was drunk. But according to Diane's husband Daniel, his wife wasn't a drinker. In an August 8th press conference, Daniel and his attorney, Dominic Barbara, initially denied that Diane had taken any drugs or was drinking alcohol that weekend because they had all the kids with them. He said they kept the bottle of vodka at the campground over the summer, but they rarely drank from it. Now, later on, Daniel seemed to change his story and said, yes, they did drink a little bit that weekend, but he said that she wasn't drunk that morning. He also said that she wasn't a big drinker in general. Maybe she had a glass of something every once in a while, but she wasn't any type of raging alcoholic. So this would have been completely out of character for her. And all this was also backed up by most of Diane's other family members and friends. They pretty much all said the same thing, that they never really saw her drink much alcohol, and she only smoked marijuana on occasion to help her fall asleep. So again, the question is, was Diane drunk? Well, we know what the toxicology report says. She absolutely was. But what did the people who interacted with her that morning say? According to almost everyone, Diane seemed completely fine. The Hunter Lake campground co-owner, who was also friends with the Schulers, spoke with Diane right before she left and claimed that she seemed sober. The gas station clerk and the employees at the McDonald's said the same exact thing. I know for a fact she wasn't drunk when she came into the station, the gas station employee said in a news report. She was fine, but she did ask for Tylenol. The Schulers' private investigator also conducted extensive interviews with the McDonald's employees who served her that morning, and they all said the same thing. She seemed 100% sober and was able to have a completely normal conversation with them as she ordered the food. So there was no doubt that she left the campground that morning sober, at least according to her family. Now, before we go on, I want to talk about that stop at McDonald's for a second. I mentioned a little bit earlier that Diane ordered food for the kids, but only ordered an iced coffee and an orange juice for herself. She didn't order any food. Well, those that allege that Diane was drinking that morning say that she purchased the OJ so that she could mix the vodka. She was basically making a ton of screwdrivers. But none of the McDonald's employees said that they saw her pouring any type of alcohol into her drink, and no security cameras from inside the restaurant captured that either. So it's only been a theory. And if that's really what Diane did, then she must have mixed the drinks after she left the McDonald's, which seems to make sense with what we know. If Diane and the kids stopped at the McDonald's at 9:56 and stayed for about an hour, and the crash happened at 1:30, that means that she drank the equivalent of 10 drinks in about 2.5 hours, maybe less. We know the gas station employee said that she didn't seem drunk, and they stopped there after the trip to McDonald's. We also know that the Hansons didn't think that Diane sounded drunk on the first few phone calls either. So it makes sense that Diane probably started drinking between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. That also explains the undigested alcohol in her stomach. She probably drank all the way up to the time of the crash. 10 drinks within 2 hours is a lot of alcohol for her body to try and process in such a short amount of time. But again, Diane's family says alcohol wasn't what caused the crash. So then, what does her family say did? Well, they basically refused to believe that she would have ever done anything to jeopardize the kids. So they wanted to find any other reason that this could have happened. And this is what they came up with. It was some type of medical emergency. The first thing they said it could be was a stroke. And if she had a stroke, then maybe that caused her to think that the vodka was water. It's called a transient ischemic attack, or TIA, and it happens when blood flow to the brain stops for a brief period of time. And if that happens, the person with TIA usually experiences mild stroke-like symptoms that can sometimes cause disorientation and blurred vision. The family really liked this theory because to them, it checked off all the boxes. 1, Diane seemed really disoriented during the phone calls and could explain things like calling her brother by her husband's name. And 2, the blurred vision. Well, we already know that Diane was swerving in and out of lanes on the highway, and her own niece, who died in the crash, said her aunt was complaining about not being able to see. So according to Diane's family, a stroke seems possible. Another theory was diabetes. According to her family and attorney, Diane had been overweight for pretty much her entire adult life and suffered from some type of diabetes. Now, I say some type of diabetes because some sources say that she was only diagnosed with gestational diabetes, which is related to pregnancy and usually goes away on its own. So we don't know whether she had a chronic type of diabetes or not. Some reports say that she did, and others say that it was only gestational. Either way, the family believed that having diabetes increased Diane's risk of having a stroke. And if that's the case, they wondered if she could have mistakenly thought the vodka was water. Obviously, this was something that the victims' families rejected from the get-go. How could someone mistakenly believe that they were drinking water when they were almost downing an entire bottle of vodka? Well, again, Diane's family argued that a stroke, either caused by her diabetes or TIA, may have caused her to become really, really confused. Next, they said that an infected tooth could also be to blame. So in the weeks and months leading up to the crash, Diane apparently had a really bad infected tooth. So her family wondered if that infection could have spread to her brain. The infection was apparently so bad that she needed a root canal, but she was too afraid to make the appointment at her dentist office. So here's how that theory goes. She had an infected tooth that she never got fixed. The infection spread to her brain, causing symptoms like confusion and blurry vision. And on the day of the crash, she was in a lot of physical pain, which explains why she stopped at the gas station looking for the over-the-counter pain medication. So Diane's family wonders that if she started drinking the vodka simply for pain relief. She didn't have any Tylenol or ibuprofen or anything like that, so she turned to the alcohol because she was in so much pain from the infected tooth. Maybe she didn't intend to drink so much, but she was in so much pain. But that's not all. Eventually, the family said that on top of the tooth, she also had a lump in one of her legs, which to them could have led to an embolism. At one point, they even thought that she could have had a heart attack. It seems like they wanted to believe anything other than just being drunk could have caused her to do this. But that's not what the forensic evidence said. Every single one of those medical conditions was ruled out at the autopsy. according to the Westchester medical examiner who performed it, there was no evidence that she had suffered from either a stroke, aneurysm, or a heart attack. The only thing that stood out from the autopsy was the toxicology report. They couldn't find any other medical explanation to explain why this happened. Yes, she did have a bad tooth. Yes, she may or may not have had diabetes. But the medical examiner didn't believe that any of that caused the crash or the alcohol in her system. When it comes to Diane's drinking habits, her family argued that if she was a heavy drinker, then there should have been some evidence of that in her autopsy. They thought that simply the absence of major organ damage, typically seen in chronic alcoholics, basically proved that she wasn't much of a drinker. But that claim is up for debate. Some medical examiners say that the absence of organ damage doesn't necessarily rule out alcohol abuse. Others say that it does, so it's hard to say for sure. The only thing we know from the autopsy is that Diane's organs didn't show much damage. So we can't really say how much she was drinking in the past. We only know how much she drank that morning. But Diane's husband and the family didn't stop there. They also questioned whether it was actually Diane's blood that was tested at the autopsy. If, for some reason, the lab that tested her blood for alcohol and drugs had mistakenly tested the wrong sample, then maybe the results were inaccurate. And it wasn't actually Diane's blood that showed the insane amount of alcohol and THC. It was actually someone else's. To see if there had been a mistake, the family took DNA from Diane's toothbrush and had it compared against the blood tested during the autopsy. While they waited to hear back, they also wanted to have Diane's body exhumed so that they could do things like perform an independent test on her hair and retest fluid samples, something that wasn't done during the original autopsy. Now, the reason why they wanted to test her hair was because that it might show Diane's drug history. Analyzing someone's hair can sometimes tell us whether someone had used drugs in the weeks and months prior to their death. Again, something her family hoped would show that she wasn't this drunk or regular marijuana user. Now, at first, the Westchester Medical Examiner's Office said that this wasn't a good idea. That's because fluid samples degrade over time, which can lead to lower levels of alcohol and THC readings. Although that might not be true. Some experts came forward at this time saying that the results should be similar regardless of how long someone has been dead. As long as the fluid was properly stored, then there shouldn't be any problems with retesting it. This probably won't come as a surprise to anyone, but not everyone was too happy about all of this, especially the families of the 3 victims killed in the SUV. They couldn't believe that Daniel or the Schuler family just wouldn't accept the autopsy findings or the belief that she was drunk. These people thought these claims simply prolonged the grieving process and only made them relive the crash every single time they saw Daniel get on TV, basically denying Diane's alcohol and drug use. One of the victims' brothers issued a statement about this, saying, quote, "I want Daniel Schuler to know that he keeps inflicting more pain on all concerned once again by going to the media to try and paint a picture of a perfect wife and a perfect mother." End quote. Another one of the victim's daughters said this, quote, "Every time he does it, he brings it back for us. I just wish that he would just admit that she was drunk. Maybe if he knows what happened that morning, if they argued or anything, that would be the truth. He wants the truth, so do we." End quote. I think that's really what this came down to. The victims' families wanted Diane's family to just accept that she was drunk, and her family didn't want to. They wanted Diane portrayed as this perfect wife and perfect mother who would have never done something like this. So everyone waited on pins and needles to see what the new testing would reveal. But here's the reality. the original lab didn't make a mistake. It was, in fact, Diane's blood they tested during the original autopsy. So what does all the forensic evidence mean? Well, it means a few things in my opinion. Number one, no other medical reason caused the crash. She didn't have a stroke or a heart attack. There was no evidence that her infected tooth had anything to do with it either. The only thing that medically stood out was the toxicology report. Number two, Diane was drunk at the time. There's no question about it. And number three, it was her blood. There's no question about that either. The lab didn't make a mistake. But not even that seemed to satisfy the family, because after that, they started coming up with different reasons for why she could have drank that much. Like maybe she did it by accident. She thought it was water or something like that, like I talked about earlier. Another theory was maybe the infected tooth she had was really, really bothering her. So again, she turned to the alcohol because the gas station didn't have the pain medication she wanted, so she basically self-medicated. Of course, that doesn't explain why she drank so much. You probably don't need the equivalent of 10 drinks to quote-unquote self-medicate. But for the Schulers, it at least offered a possible explanation for something that seemed so out of character for the Diane that they said they knew. We'll probably never fully understand why this happened. We know what the forensic evidence suggests, but it doesn't help understand why. Was she on a suicide mission that morning? Maybe. We know she was pretty much the sole caregiver of her 2 young children, and she was also the financial breadwinner in the family. She made a lot more money than Daniel ever did. So maybe the pressures of being both supermom and the breadwinner were too much for her, and she set out that morning on a suicide mission. But that doesn't answer the question, why the kids? If Diane set out to kill herself by driving the wrong way on a state highway, why kill so many other people, including her own child and 3 nieces? Why not pick a day that she's by herself? So I don't know if suicide was the mission that day. Was this simply an accident and she didn't intend on drinking so much? The pain of that infected tooth was just too much to deal with? Or is there any other possible explanation? In the end, and despite Daniel's best efforts, the authorities ruled the crash a homicide. They believe the deaths were caused by negligent driving on Diane's behalf. But since she also died in the accident, there's no way to press any criminal charges against her. Due to the crash and its publicity, the governor of New York, David Paterson, proposed the Child Passenger Protection Act, which would make it a felony to drive while intoxicated with a child under the age of 16 in the car. It was signed into state law on November 18, 2009. Today, Daniel Schuler continues to refute claims that his wife is anything short of the perfect woman. He recalls her as a reliable, trustworthy, honest person, and denies her victims' families' claims that she was a murderer. Most of Diane's family and friends also don't believe that she would knowingly put any child into danger, and they were all still trying to prove that there's a medical reason for her actions that day, despite what the forensic evidence suggests. Warren and Jackie, Diane's brother and sister-in-law, started the Hance Family Foundation to honor the lives of Emma, Allison, and Kate. The foundation offers self-esteem programs all over the world. And in 2012, Jackie and Warren welcomed a baby girl into their family, naming her Casey Rose, a combination of her sister's first initials. K is for Kate, A is for Allison, S is for sisters, E is for Emma, and Y is for you. When Jackie was asked about how she now feels about her sister-in-law, she said this, quote, "People always ask how I feel about Diane. You can't imagine how complex that question is. How does a person go from being like a sister to me, adored by my girls and cherished by my husband, to being the one who ruined our lives? How could this person I trusted completely have done something so unthinkable that I couldn't, and I still can't wrap my head around it. End quote. Over the years, the story has taken over television shows and the media. In September 2009, the Dr. Phil show covered the story, and the following month, so did Oprah. The Law & Order episode Doped, which first aired in November 2009, centers around a very similar fictional crash. It features a woman who speeds down the West Side Highway in the wrong direction before crashing and killing herself, her daughter, and 2 nieces. There's also an HBO documentary about the case called There's Something Wrong with Aunt Diane, which is available for free on YouTube. Now, I've watched this particular documentary and I've seen it, but I just want to say that this particular one is definitely filmed from the perspective of Diane's family. So if you want to watch this one, just know that. Even though no criminal charges can be filed, there have been several civil lawsuits filed over the years. The first involves the Bastardi family. They were the ones killed in the SUV. They filed a lawsuit against Diane and her brother, Warren Hance, seeking unspecified damages for, quote, willful and reckless conduct. According to their attorneys, state law required them to also include Warren Hance in the lawsuit because he was the one that owned the minivan that Diane drove. Then there was the lawsuit between Jackie Hance and Daniel. Of course, we already know that Jackie lost all 3 of her daughters in the crash. She sued Daniel, who's also her brother-in-law, and claimed that the girls, quote, suffered terror, fear of impending death, extreme horror, fright, and mental anguish. But by July of 2014, all of these lawsuits were either settled or dropped. What do you make of the forensic evidence? And what do you think happened that morning? To share your thoughts on this story, be sure to follow the show on Instagram and Facebook. To find out what I think about the case, sign up to become a patron at patreon.com/forensictales. After each episode, I release a bonus episode where I share my personal thoughts and opinions about the case. Don't forget to subscribe to Forensic Tales so you don't miss an episode. We release a new episode every Monday. If you love the show, consider leaving us a positive review or tell friends and family about us. You can also help support the show through Patreon. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Please join me next week. We'll have a brand new case and a brand new story to talk about. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell Ariola. For a small monthly contribution, you can help create new compelling cases for the show, help fund research, and assist with production and editing costs. For supporting the show, you'll become one of the first to listen to new ad-free episodes and snag exclusive show merchandise not available anywhere else. To learn about how you can support the show, head over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/forensictales, or simply click the support link in the show notes. You can also support the show by leaving a positive review or telling friends and family about us. Forensic Tales is a podcast made possible by our Patreon producers, Tony A., Christine B., Sherry A., Michael D., Nicola, Jerry M., Brian W., Megan G., Ureli, Jerry, Ann F., Ken S., Carol A., Louise B., and Marianne C. If you'd like to become a producer of the show, head over to our Patreon page or email me at Courtney@forensictales.com to find out how you can become involved. For a complete list of sources used in this episode, please visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.